Hi, I'm Diane Macedo. Thanks for streaming with us. Ukrainian officials say they are working to evacuate more civilians from a massive steel plant in the port city of Mariupol. More than 100 civilians escaped that plant yesterday. Video filmed by the far-right Azov battalion and posted by Ukrainian officials purportedly shows some of those evacuations. Ukrainian officials say there could be as many as 1,000 civilians still trapped in that facility, as well as hundreds of soldiers. Russian forces have been bombarding Mariupol for weeks now. New drone video posted by a local Ukrainian official yesterday shows the devastation there. Meanwhile, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and other lawmakers met with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky in Kyiv yesterday to reaffirm U.S. support for Ukraine. This comes as a local official in the Russian city of Belgorod near the Ukraine border reports powerful explosions there overnight. There are also reports of a large fire at a military site in Belgorod. The cause of the fire is unknown. In the last few days, there have been reports of explosions in several Russian cities, but no claims of responsibility. Meanwhile, a new ABC News Washington Post poll shows a majority of voters don't approve of the job President Biden is doing. The president poked fun at those polling numbers at the White House Correspondents' Dinner this weekend. Take a look.
Thank you, Steve, for that introduction. And a special thanks to the 42% of you who actually applauded.
Now, ABC's Kenneth Moton joins me live now for more on this new poll. Kenneth, the president, obviously, he's trying to make light of this, and his approval rating is up 5 points since February, but it's still just 42%. What do these numbers tell you?
Yeah, jokes aside, we know that when it comes to these numbers, the president still has a lot of work to do ahead of the midterm election, 6 months away. The president got that slight bump for his handling for the pandemic and the war in Ukraine. On the pandemic, you know, Americans are starting to see those mandates being lifted. They're seeing pre-pandemic numbers for the unemployment rate as well. And that's all having an impact on the president's handling there. And I should note also, Diane, that while we say that this is about how Americans feel, and even though Americans think that good-paying jobs, for instance, are easy to find right now, this doesn't help Democrats because those registered voters favor Republican candidates by a 10-point margin, even though they trust Republicans by that wide margin on the economy right now. On Ukraine, people are watching this administration aid the Ukrainian people as they try to fight off the Russians in their country. That big aid package, the billions of dollars this administration has sent, the amount of equipment and weapons this country has sent to aid the Ukrainian people as well, we know that it's gotten bipartisan support.
And if based on these numbers, where is the president most vulnerable?
When we look at this ABC News Washington Post poll, we know that when it comes to crime, the economy, and inflation, that's where the president is most vulnerable right now. We are an inflation nation, and Americans are not only concerned about inflation, they are upset about it, Diane. We see the impact of this war on inflation, and that's having an impact on how Americans view this president. The poll found inflation to be a major irritant. Half of Americans are concerned about it. And again, not just concerned, they are mad about it. And 6 months ahead of the midterms, what we have seen throughout this poll is that it's not good for the president or Democrats. And while there is some, not bad news for the president, ahead of these midterms, he needs pretty much gangbuster numbers here to do well, because historically, the opposing party or the sitting president has a better night on midterm election.
So how's the White House responding to these numbers?
The White House, they'll be asked about this during the daily press briefing, but the White House has always said the president is about getting out there on the road, selling his agenda. They believe that, and the president has said he's got to do a better job of getting out there on the road to sell that agenda as well, because this president, and really any president, wants to do big things in office. So the president's agenda is on the line here. There's the other half of that infrastructure plan. There are other big issues this administration wants to tackle. And if there's a party of opposition in control, that's just not good for President Biden, and he knows that.
All right, Kenneth Moton for us in Washington. Thank you, Kenneth.
Thank you.
And as we mentioned, a local official in the Russian city of Belgorod is reporting powerful explosions there overnight. ABC's Marcus Moore joins me live now from Kyiv with more on this. Marcus, what do we know at this point about these possible strikes in Russia?
Well, we know that the the strikes. There have been powerful explosions there, and it does speak to the unpredictable and the very volatile situation that's unfolding in the east, where the heaviest fighting has been taking place. That is the part of the country, particularly the Donbass region in the east of Ukraine, that the Russians have been focusing a lot of their resources and their attention as they try to achieve strategic and military goals there ahead of the May 9th Victory Day celebrations that many observers say the Russians will be trying to establish some type of win before that date. Now, a lot of the fighting, as we've said, has been happening in the east. There have also, though, Diane, been airstrikes in the southern part of Ukraine, particularly in Odessa and obviously in Mariupol, where we have focused a lot of our reporting on the dire situation there. So this continues to develop. This war now in its 68th day. The airstrikes and the fighting continues.
And Marcus, I know you spent time with the Territorial Defense Force in Ukraine over the weekend. What are their priorities now that the battle for Kyiv has, essentially been won, or at least considered that way, and Russia seems to be shifting focus to the east?
Yeah, it is important to point out, Diane, that while we are past the 2-month point of this war, 10 weeks at least that the fighting has been happening here in this most current conflict, the Russians were trying to take Kyiv, and they were unsuccessful in that. And the soldiers, the people we met over the weekend, many of them were volunteers who had everyday lives before joining the Territorial Defense Force. We saw a father and a son who joined the force, as well as a 19-year-old college student. He was studying at a university or a college in Bucha and decided to forego his studies to join this defense force to defend his country. And when you talk to someone like that, I asked him why, and he said there really is not a question of why, that it was something that you were supposed to do. We met them this weekend as they were continuing to not only defend the city, but also train on ambushes and patrols, because they are very cognizant of the fact that this war is still ongoing and that there has been some suggestion and threats that Russia could try to come back to Kyiv, and they want to be ready for that. We saw the trenches that they had in place to defend the city of Kyiv, where the Russians got within just a few miles of the city and they were able to repel them. So while things are much calmer here, they admit that in the first weeks of the war, it was very tense. There was a lot of fighting. In the most recent weeks, things have been relatively quiet. There have been air raid sirens and an airstrike as recently as Friday, but it is certainly not the situation that they saw very early on in this war. But they're not letting their guard down yet, Diane. They are still ready and say they will fight until the very end to protect this country.
And Marcus, President Zelensky says that the first group of civilians have been evacuated from that Mariupol steel plant, where a Ukrainian military unit is making a last stand. But he also says roughly 1,000 are said to still be trapped there. What's the latest?
Diane, the latest information we have, and keep in mind that information is very hard to come by in Mariupol because there are very few reporters or journalists there, and information is not flowing as freely as in some of the other areas. But we know, according to the Mariupol City Council, as well as government officials, that there are as many as 1,000, mainly women and children, who have taken refuge in a steel plant that we have reported on extensively. This steel plant, the scene of not only a bunker, a safe haven for people who were trying to flee the fighting, but there are also the remaining Ukrainians there in that city who have been fighting and who have been trying to hold on. This location, this particular location in Ukraine, has been viewed as a symbolic area in the sense that this is a city that Russia has tried to take. It is a city of roughly, before wartime, roughly 500,000 people in the city itself. And so Russia wants to take that city. And if they are able to succeed in that, they could achieve some military goals and taking control of the eastern part of Ukraine. And in the midst of all of that, you have everyday people who are caught in the middle of the fighting, who for weeks, Diane, have been trying to get out to safety, and they haven't been able to do that because of the constant shelling. And over the weekend, there was a ceasefire that was negotiated between Russia and Ukraine, and the UN was involved in that, as well as the International Crescent and Red Cross, that helped to facilitate the evacuation of dozens of people. And the hope was that they could evacuate more today, but there are still many who remain trapped in that plant.
All right, Marcus Moore, thanks for that. Stay safe. And voters are set to head to the polls in Ohio and Indiana tomorrow as primaries get underway for the midterm elections. Let's bring in ABC News contributors Heidi Heitkamp, a former senator from North Dakota, and Barbara Comstock, a former Republican congresswoman from Virginia, for more on this. Barbara, Republicans are hoping to take back control of Congress in the midterms. And President Biden's poll numbers, they're not great, but they are rising. Is that cause for concern? And what do you think Republicans have to do to win back control of Congress?
Well, I think the odds are certainly in the Republicans' favor right now, but who gets nominated is going to make a difference. So when you look at race like the race in Ohio, I do think these candidates have been falling over themselves to say they're more Trumpy than the next. Yet Trump, messed up last night at his rally and didn't even pronounce the name of of J.D. Vance, who he had endorsed correctly. I think he called him J.D. Mandel or J.P. Mandel. So this is going to, if you have bad candidates still matter. I happen to think, J.D. Vance is a pretty awful candidate to have running for Senate, and that could impact whether or not Republicans win. Or if you have some of these other extreme candidates in the House who win seats that are more purple seats, that could impact it. But certainly if they can find their way to, nominating normal, mainstream Republicans, conservative but not crazy, I think they're on their way to certainly winning the House and a good chance at the Senate.
So, Heidi, let's take the other side of that. What do you think Democrats need to focus on to keep control of Congress?
Well, they need to focus on talking about what they've already done on infrastructure, making sure that they're sending the message, and then drawing the comparisons. Barbara's absolutely right. If you're Republicans, you're feeling pretty good, but you're watching these primaries very closely, because if you nominate someone that is way too extreme, there is a lot of opportunity for Democrats to exploit that. Biden famously said, "Don't compare me to the almighty, compare me to the alternative." There is a primary race in the Democratic side that's of interest to people like me. Martha Fudge's old district is the more moderate Democrat won there in the special election. We see a primary again. I think that's another bellwether for hearts and minds on what Democratic voters are going to be looking for. Maybe somebody more moderate with as they see it, practical solutions, or an innovative, idealistic candidate. And so we'll wait and see what happens. But, right now, the Senate primary in Ohio is full of people who have, I think, some looming problems when they get to the general election. They have run, as Barbara said, way too closely with the past president.
Now, these primaries are also a key test for former President Trump and his influence over the Republican Party. Barbara, you talked about how important these primaries are. What is at stake for former President Trump, for the MAGA movement in general, and for the Republican Party in general?
Well, first of all, I'll point out that Donald Trump is probably on his way to losing his preferred candidate in a lot of the governor's races. Governor Kemp is ahead by double digits and certainly is going to win that primary. I think you're going to see there's 4 governors that he's opposed that are incumbent governors, all who are going to win their primaries because he's picked weak candidates and it's just been a campaign of revenge. I think he focused on this J.D. Vance nomination because he knows these others are failing. So I think whatever happens tomorrow in Ohio, the press should not give it outsized influence because Trump, Mo Brooks already collapsed into 3rd place, and so Trump abandoned him because he was an embarrassment. There are other candidates like the Pennsylvania Senate. The candidate he first endorsed had to drop out. So Donald Trump already has a bad record on who he's picked. So even if J.D. Vance gets through tomorrow, and I think if you look at some of the campaign specifics, it looks like Josh Mandel might have run a more grassroots campaign. I'm hoping certainly that Matt Dolan, who's the one who's not been being a Trump suck-up, that he somehow can come up the middle and prevail. But I think this may be getting more talk than it should, because Trump is failing in a lot of state and local races where he decided to play just based on revenge, and the good, sane Republicans are going to prevail. Like in DeWine, Mike DeWine, Governor DeWine was opposed by Trump. He is going to win soundly tomorrow in the primary.
Now, Heidi, that said, Trump did win both Indiana and Ohio by a fairly wide margin in 2020. So how vulnerable are Democrats there, and what do they need to do to move the needle in their direction?
Well, I think they need to nominate Tim Ryan, who clearly has been a pro-blue-collar worker congressman and politician since day one. He has a solid record opposing trade agreements, has a pretty good grassroots organization in rural America. I think that this is the frosting on the cake for the Democrats. If we can, in fact, take Ohio with someone like Tim Ryan, that will be, I think, a bellwether and perhaps a harbinger of things to come in 2024. So expect a very aggressive race. I think it's a tough environment for Democrats, especially with president's approval rating where it's at. But Tim Ryan, if there's a candidate who models the old Ohio pro-working class model, it is Tim Ryan. And I think it will draw some very interesting contrasts.
Now, Barbara, what do you think they need to do to keep this going?
Well, for Republicans, listening to Donald Trump and talking about the past is a recipe for failure, I would argue. It might get you a primary nomination, but it'll put you more in danger in the general election. And we've certainly seen, and we had candidates was in the past who lost in really good years. When we had Todd Akin running against Claire McCaskill in Missouri, that should have been a Republican seat in a Republican year, and Republicans lost because they nominated an extreme candidate. So I know in the Senate, Mitch McConnell and Senate leadership is very mindful of this. In the House, not so much so, although, there are a lot of outside groups that are trying to make sure we don't nominate, the crazy element. And I in fact, am involved with a group that's opposing Marjorie Greene. Please, anyone who'd like to oppose her in her primary, we got a good Republican woman running there.
All right, Heidi Heitkamp, Barbara Comstock, thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Coming up, the growing legal battle over the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre. The hearing to determine whether a lawsuit brought by the last 3 survivors can move forward. Stay with us. Welcome back. 3 survivors of the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre are headed to court today, asking that their case for damages be allowed to proceed. Those survivors say city officials at the time allowed the violence to happen, leading to the destruction of what was known as Black Wall Street. Senior national correspondent Steve Osinsami recently spoke with them.
Tell me about...
She's the oldest living survivor of the Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921.
My name is Viola Ford Fletcher. 107 years old.
She's hoping that a judge in Oklahoma will allow a lawsuit she's a part of to move forward.
Is it safe to say you are pushing, you and the other survivors are pushing for payments?
Yes, whatever it takes to replace our loss. Yes.
In your lifetime?
Yes, sir. While I'm living.
In many households across this country, they put respect on her name and call her Mother Fletcher because of what she's overcome. She and 2 other survivors still living are suing the city of Tulsa, their sheriff, and other authorities for damages that are more than 100 years old. When she was just a child, she and her family ran for their lives after a mob of their white neighbors destroyed the Greenwood district, known to many as Black Wall Street, one of the most prosperous black communities in America.
That night, when we was aroused by the parents, what was going on, all the shooting and killing and fires and airplanes, people screaming, people lying on the streets bleeding.
In the lawsuit, her attorney argues that the destruction of black homes and public executions of black people were allowed by authorities, and that those authorities can now be sued under a state public nuisance law. They're suing for a victims' compensation fund that could potentially mean hundreds of millions of dollars.
I'm not the judge, but I do believe that the law and the facts are on our side.
A similar effort to go after drug makers for the state's opioid crisis recently failed. And Tulsa's mayor, who led the effort to help find missing black victims from the massacre, is against having today's taxpayers pay for yesterday's crimes and wants the judge to dismiss the lawsuit.
And I'm also opposed to levying a tax on this generation of Tulsans who are at no fault.
Mother Fletcher says she's running out of time to see justice for her family. She turns 108 years old on May 10th. Steve Osensami, ABC News, Atlanta.
Our thanks to Steve Osensami for that report. For an in-depth look at the Tulsa Race Massacre, be sure to check out Steve Osensami's podcast, Tulsa's Buried Truth, available now wherever you get your podcasts. Coming up, concerns are growing over mysterious cases of hepatitis among children. The investigation now underway in at least 10 states when we come back. Welcome back to ABC News Live. More than 1,000 structures are severely damaged after a tornado tore through Kansas over the weekend. Now a new severe weather threat is on the move. 8 million Americans are in the storm zone from Texas to Missouri. At least 10 states are reporting an increase in cases of severe hepatitis in children. Investigators are trying to uncover what's causing the liver inflammation. The CDC is asking parents to watch for early symptoms, including fever, fatigue, loss of appetite, nausea, and joint pain. The White House has announced that First Lady Jill Biden will travel to Romania and Slovakia to meet with U.S. service members, embassy personnel, and Ukrainian refugees. The First Lady will spend Mother's Day meeting with families displaced by the war. And we're learning new details about a midair stunt that resulted in a plane crash. The lead pilot has admitted that the FAA denied him permission to conduct the stunt, but he says he kept quiet and went ahead with it anyway. Transportation correspondent Gio Benitez has the latest.
Over the weekend, the pilot behind the failed plane swap streamed live on Hulu, apologizing for ignoring the FAA after the stunt ended in a plane crash. One of the planes losing control during the planned free fall as the two pilots tried to swap planes in midair. One making it into the other plane, the other forced to use a parachute. In a statement, pilot in charge Luke Akins acknowledged receiving the denial from the FAA just days before, saying a specific exemption was not granted and I made the personal decision to move forward with plane swap. I regret not sharing this information with my team and those who supported me. Now this weekend, Akins posting this never-before-seen video of their last rehearsal. Watch as Akins and his cousin Andy Farrington jump out of the planes and successfully swap in midair. Akins told the FAA that these rehearsals had backup pilots on board. The FAA said the planes could not be empty at any point during the stunt. Red Bull, the event sponsor, telling ABC News, Luke has been entirely upfront and honest about his responsibility in this matter. We look forward to his continued friendship. Hulu, which ABC's parent company Disney has a majority stake, has not commented.
And the FAA tells us this investigation is well underway. Akins says he is cooperating. Now, we don't know exactly what he could face, but we know, of course, that the FAA can revoke or suspend a pilot's certificate. They can also fine a pilot. Diane?
All right, Gio Benitez, thanks for that. And thank you for joining us. I'm Diane Macedo.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.